Hi, my name's Ed Wallace from Utah Standard News, and my guest today is Celeste Meyeres. She's running for Kane County Commissioner, Seat B, and she currently serves as Kane County GOP Chair, and she's on the City Council of Kanab, which is the county seat. And she was on the Planning Commission for Kanab, and also she was the county coordinator for the successful tax reform referendum effort. Welcome, Celeste.
Thank you, Ed. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I apologize because I'm kind of a little old school. I called you she. I probably should have called you a carbonized life form or something. I hate to be so politically incorrect. You've got some good experience. And how would you describe yourself politically?
Well, I'd say I'm a constitutionally minded Republican.
Straightforward. What are your pressing issues, your goals for this election?
One thing I really want to do is to be able to help push back against some of the state and federal overreach that we're starting to experience more and more. And that's going to take a very cohesive, very strategic commission. The Utah legislature has started to edge more and more into, first they're just gathering information for their reference, and then they'll start a scoring system, and then you get a grade maybe or a report on how you're doing with certain things. One of them is environmental concerns or water use or social issues, social equity, or some other thing like that. And then the next step is they'll start just doing voluntary compliance. And then they start with the non-voluntary compliance or the withholding of benefits until you comply. And then before you know it, it's full on social credit. Only those who are subscribed to that particular political narrative are eligible for inclusion in society and programs. I want to be commissioner because everything starts at a local level. A local level is really where we have the only chance to fight back against this oppressive social awareness, social justice movement. And within the local government, the entity that has the best chance of pushing back against state or federal overreach is the county commission. So that's why I'm interested in running for county commission.
Do you think Kane County and other smaller counties have a voice up in Salt Lake?
Yes, if we work together strategically. So not only does each commission need to work amongst themselves, it's okay locally, in my opinion, for local county commission meetings for one commissioner to think one thing and the other two to think another thing and to have a little push and pull. But then when it comes time to presenting a unified front to the state or to the federal government, that's when they need to work together as a team and really hash out, this is going to be our stance on such and such. You go talk to Representative so-and-so. I'll go talk to Senator committee meeting. We have a more effective voice when we work together. And then, so that's within each county. And then, so for example, Kane County is part of the 5-county association of governments with Garfield, Washington, Iron, Beaver, and Kane. And if we can all coalesce around each other and communicate with each other and sign resolutions together, make statements together, that kind of thing, then we'll have more of a voice, because we are so far down here that we kind of need to be strategic. We need to fight above our weight.
You probably generate a lot of revenue for the state, federal government, through your tourism tax dollars. Do you think it's proportionate, or is what you generate for them and what they give back to you?
So I'll give you an example that your question points to. The allocation of state roads money is based on permanent population of a county. Well, because we only have 6% of our county that is able to have people living on it, we don't have a big population, 8,000 people. We're finally up to 8,000 people, Ed. But we have visitorship that outguns our permanent population. So we have impacts on our roads. For example, going through Kanab, there used to be 2 million cars passing through Kanab, or Some of it was residents, some of it was visitors every year. Now it's up to 4 million. I wouldn't be surprised if it was more than that when we get the most recent statistics. But we're only getting state money for roads based on our measly 8,000 people. And another example is the funding that for search and rescue and things like that. It's pulling teeth because they tend to only want to give it for permanent residents.
Kane County is about 4,000 square miles, and it's unique in the sense that you've got 5 national parks or monuments. I don't know if there's another county in the country that has that. And you've got 2 state parks. How much of this land is controlled by the state and the federal government?
So 94% of the county is controlled by either the state or the federal government, leaving 6%.
That's incredible.
Yes, it's a little bit crippling. I've described it before that in some ways I feel like we're sharecroppers because we don't own the land. There's no possibility really to own the land. To a large extent, I sometimes feel like we are just hamsters in a wheel grinding out revenue for these outside entities that then return a portion of it to us. And every citizen, no matter where they live, that is their situation to a certain extent, whether they are aware of it or not. But in our situation, it's exacerbated. For example, really only tourism is left to us. So it makes it difficult to diversify our economy and truly resilient.
If you just Google Kane County, what is Kane County known for? Coal. You have some coal mining, I think, in Alton. How much other coal resources do you have available but can't use because they're locked up through the federal government?
94%.
Oh my gosh. And
No, I'm kind of being facetious, but it is very difficult because we don't necessarily have access to the resources that we have. It's not just coal, it's also logging and mining of other resources. We're completely beholden to Washington, D.C., and whoever's working behind the desk at Washington, D.C., usually an unelected person who's often been in that position for decades, or a person who's been trained by those decades-long workers. And for example, even when President Trump was in the administration, he opened up the monument. President Trump cut the Grand Staircase National Monument in half, and we were celebrating, throwing our hats up in the air with joy. But then the BLM administrators back in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere drug their feet about approving a land management plan. So in effect, we could use it just as much, which is not at all, as when it was a national monument. They stalled until the Biden administration came in, and then the Biden administration returned it to national monument status. So we gained nothing by that historic win that we could have had with President Trump returning half of the monument to non-monument status.
If you had everything opened up so you could log and mine, and how would that affect the economy if you were able to utilize all the resources available in logging and mining and coal?
Well, for one thing, a lot of the jobs that come from tourism are relatively low on the pay scale. So they're not necessarily child rearing or home buying wages when you're cleaning rooms in a hotel or waiting tables. And the jobs that come from logging and mining tend to be more on the sustainable side as far as economically. And so we could attract more families, could have more home owners, which would alleviate the pressures from the long-term rental market. It would make us more feel like we owned at least even that 6% of the county.
So the government has basically made it impossible for the county to thrive because you can't do logging, you can't do mining, you can't do coal. All you've got left is tourism. And if the gas prices continue to rise because of government regulations and direction. And if there's a COVID lockdown again, you're cut off from the rest of the world.
Mhm.
Any thoughts on what might happen then?
Well, it's interesting. This is one of the most reliably Republican counties in the entire nation. Only one time in the entire history of Kane County has a non-Republican president been elected, for example, or the vote coming from our area has always been very Republican. And I do think that there would be an old school rebellion if that were to super become an issue. And even, for example, during COVID, there was quite a bit of local control. I think in a way, the state intentionally turned a blind eye toward us. One, because we are so far down here, we have the luxury of not being under their skirts. But for another thing, it wouldn't be a good look for them to be in a fight with us. I think it would bring a lot of this, frankly, oppression to the forefront. And I don't think it's a fight that they wanted to have.
Yeah. To finish up with the economy, I had almost a 2% growth in employment last year.
Mm-hmm.
Got less than a 3% unemployment rate.
Mm-hmm.
And you're slated to grow about 38% in the next 10 years as far as your economy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's quite a bit. How are you going to manage that growth, and what role does government have to assist? Is there any plans or any smart growth? That's a buzzword these days.
Yeah, there's multiple ways you could look at that, Ed. One way to look at it is only 6% of our county is eligible for growth. So even if every single inch of that 6% were built on, we'd still have a 94% non-grown areas. And so maybe we don't need to think about it as much as other areas where they own a much higher percentage of their county, where it even could potentially be developed. We have 6% that could potentially be developed. Now, that doesn't take into account waterways. That doesn't take into account topographical limitations like clay or cliffs, which we have here aplenty, or canyons or anything else. So we have this tiny little bit of land. Are we going to begrudge houses being built just on that tiny little bit that's left? Maybe we don't. I guess the other piece of it, what was the first part of your question?
How are you going to handle almost 40% growth in the next 10 years?
Yes, thank you. So our engineers think that we'll have projected that we'll have growth between 1 and 3% each year. And that's an average. And that is not too far off from that. 38% is not so different from 3% a year. If you put it out over a number of years and then average it. We've had years where we've had negative growth with people moving out of the area due to lack of industry. And we've had years with a little bit more than the top end of the average, a little bit more than 3% growth. And that is where I think government can a little bit step back and allow market forces to play out. And I don't think that the government needs to micromanage exactly what growth looks like from year to year, because generally we're not very good at playing God. We're just humans. And when we start saying who can live somewhere, who can't, who can have a job here, who can't, then not only are we in danger of enacting similar policies to the left, but we're also in danger, in my opinion, of playing God. And I don't think that plays well.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult because you're going to have more gas stations, more roads, more power grids.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everything. That's double-digit growth. And
yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. And there's a couple of things that help with that. One is that when a developer brings a need for more infrastructure, that developer is also responsible for providing that infrastructure. So, for example, if a developer is going to do a housing development that's going to require the road to be widened, then the developer has to pay for that road to be widened. And then the other piece of it is the city has to plan for that as well, or the county. So we know that every governmental municipal entity is tasked with providing adequate water, adequate electricity, or contracting out for it. We can't just say, oh, that's inconvenient or expensive or more than we expected, so no one else can move here. In order to keep calling yourself a county or keep calling yourself a city, you simply must provide for the needs of the residents, however many that is.
Yeah, over here in Washington County, they're expecting quite a bit, and they've been talking about that Lake Powell pipeline for quite a while. Are you any part of that at all?
So the Lake Powell pipeline, from what I understand from talking with county engineers, has been delayed probably 20 years because Washington County was able to access a different source of water. I want to say that the Virgin plant, they went ahead and paid for the infrastructure to make that water more viable so that they weren't so dependent upon the LPP.
Yeah, I think they spent $60 million thinking about that pipeline. And now there's no water at the pipe. Now, I often wondered what happens when you run out of dirt to build on? Are you going to fly in some more dirt? About your water situation over there, probably one of the most important resources, if not the most important resource you've got to sustain life. How are you doing with that?
Are you asking about power?
No water.
Oh, water. We're very blessed in Kane County. We sit right on top of the Navajo Sandstone Aquifer, which is a huge regionally fed aquifer that the water feeds in from surrounding states and areas over hundreds of years. And what that means is that, so it's very different. So that's groundwater, right? And then there's also surface water. Now, surface water is much more dependent upon annual rainfall cycles and things like that. But groundwater, because there's going to always be more wet years, like that year a few years back when 4 times the amount of precipitation fell over the winter than usual. And then there's also drier years, which we are currently experiencing a dry couple of years. But in the long, hundreds of years cycle, you can't create or destroy water. I mean, it moves around on the planet, but it doesn't go away. So when you're sitting on top of a low spot where the water's held in by sandstone bottom, you get the benefit. We're very lucky in Kane County to have the benefit of a cycle that lasts hundreds of years. So at the least, it lasts hundreds of years. And so we don't have to worry so much, is this water going to be here next year? Yes, it will. So for example, Kanab City only uses about 17% of the water they have the rights to within the Navajo Sandstone Aquifer. The aquifer is much larger than that. Kanab City has a portion of it that they have rights to use, and they're only using 17% of the water they have rights to use. It's just like a drop, a comparative drop.
What about the federal government? How do they fit into that water equation?
So they don't really too much. The states generally manage their water rights, and each state has different laws on water diversion, water usage, who gets access to groundwater, who gets access to surface water, etc.
That's good to hear. Are the feds, are they a pretty good neighbor?
I think of them more as an overlord than a neighbor.
Yeah, 94%.
It's frustrating not even having the potential to own the land when that was one of the major tenets of the founding fathers to creating our nation. In England, there was the king's land, the king's deer, or a lord, a royalty would own things, and then the peasants, the serfs, would work the land but not have a chance to ever own it. They would produce, but only have a portion of what they produced returned to them. And if someone was going to starve that year, it was not the royalty. And in some ways, I feel like we're right there in that situation today in Kane County.
It's like that pretty much everywhere.
Yes, I guess we just feel it more because 94% of the land we don't have a chance to own. We cannot own it.
I come from New England, and that's inconceivable to me. Federal doesn't own anything, but they regulate everything,
Yes.
or the state does. So along with the growth, how is the housing over there? Is it affordable? Is it going up? I think it's kind of reached this plateau as far as the market. Kane County is one of the places I might move to.
Well, if you do, I would certainly welcome you. And it's interesting. We have accumulated quite a few what I consider to be political refugees over the past few years, especially people who want to have their children participate in a highly functional school system, people who want to get away from the restrictive lockdowns and leftist policies of some of the neighboring cities or neighboring states or neighboring cities. And I welcome those people. They're not going to come in at this moment knowing every little thing that we experience and what's important to us here. But I feel like they're in a good position to be able to learn what's important to us. They're coming from at least a starting point of appreciating what we have here and wanting to continue that.
We have an influx of Californians here in St. George.
And are most of them political refugees where they like what you have and they appreciate it and they want to feel welcomed and want to.
I would say probably most of them are either political or economic refugees.
And I think that we shouldn't be too hard on those people if they have one minor thing that they don't quite get yet, or say something a little abrasive right at the beginning. I think we should just give them grace and accept them and welcome them, and then gently, as a friend, as you get to know each other, explain a little bit more about our culture and where we're coming from and how they could have a place with us here.
Yeah, I know some of them do bring the California mentality with them. I know of one person who works for Hurricane City, and they got a call from a woman who was complaining about tumbleweed that have blown into her yard and is leaning up against her patio door and wanted to know, what are you going to do about it?
No. And those, in my opinion, they've been abused by their government their entire life. And it's just the same as if you've never known anything other than an abusive situation, you don't know what normal functioning relationships look like. So if you've been told your entire life, you can't do anything by yourself. If you ever have any questions or problems or needs, you need to go to the government. We are the only ones who know what's right and wrong. Your own ability to reason and think and have a deeply held personal beliefs is invalid. And then when you come here, they haven't learned about agency. They haven't learned about personal sovereignty. They haven't learned about liberties. They haven't learned about states' rights. They haven't learned about any of those things. And that's why I say it's so important to give them grace and to understand where they're coming from. In my opinion, it's a place of trauma.
PTSD. People in Russia, for instance, cannot think in terms of capitalism or how they can fend for themselves. It's getting to be that way here too. The population, a lot of people are thinking like a socialist. Even with those $1,200 checks they pass on a while. I know conservatives are going, geez, you get your check yet?
Yeah, and I think it's important as conservatives to hold on to the abundance mentality. That's kind of a catchphrase thrown about by the left, practice abundance or things like that. But then in their actual values, abundance isn't in their personal lexicon. It's scarcity. We're going to run out of resources. We're going to run out of space. There's too many people. There's this, there's that. And we can't get caught into that as well. We can't start thinking, oh, we've got to stop the growth because there's too many people or not enough this, not enough that. I think that when we start doing over-regulation, and it comes from a place of feeling that there's scarcity. And I think instead we should embrace the feeling of abundance. I firmly believe there's no such thing as too many people. People are a blessing and a wonderful gift, and we deserve to live.
38% job growth in the next 10 years is pretty abundant. It's going to be a tough one to handle, I think. But it sounds like you had the resources. Probably don't grow anything, though. Probably not much crops. Community garden.
We have orchards. We have alfalfa fields. We have beef.
What else do you need?
Right?
Yeah. Well, that's good. How about your health care? Do you think you're served well?
So I believe in medical sovereignty and personal responsibility, and I also believe in choice. That's my baseline principles. And then, for example, it's important for people to know when they're going to move here. We don't have a full service hospital. We have, a hospital in our county seat, which is Kanab. But if you need something major, you're going to be going to St. George or even Vegas. And that's just managing expectations.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll probably change as the population grows.
There's no such thing, just like with housing, there's no such thing as affordable healthcare. There's no such thing as affordable housing. No matter what the price is, it's going to be unaffordable to some and affordable to others. There's no universal baseline. And there's also no such thing as low cost subsidized healthcare. If someone gets healthcare at a lower price, someone else gets it at a higher price to pay for that. So I'm very against healthcare mandates. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about TRT tax, which is also called transient room tax or bed tax or tourism tax.
Okay, I don't really know much about that. I know that each county has different taxes, but yeah, tell me about that CRT.
So TRT tax, transient room tax, is a nightly tax. It's assessed, the state sets the rates, and then local areas can add to that base rate. And it's for when people stay in accommodations that are less than 30 days length stay. One of the reasons I'd like to be a commissioner is because the state legislature sets parameters on how that money can be used. So, for example, the most recent directive is that the county must use 47% of that money, which in Kane County, it's between 5 and 6 million a year. 47% of that money must go back to tourism marketing. So it's a serpent eating its tail. They bring in money with tourism, and the money goes to pay for more people to come there as tourism. And then that money goes to make so more people come there for tourism. And do you see what I'm saying? And again, we've got this situation where the government is telling people, in effect, what they can do for a living. And now they're telling them what they can do with their money, but also what industry they can expect to have in the future. So if current money needs to go to bringing in more of that industry in the future, you can see we're really under the boot of the government. Both state and federal government is on our neck, that we can't get out of this tourism cycle. And the other 53% that can be used for things besides marketing still has to be used within very strict parameters of what the state government, what the Utah legislature considers mitigation of tourism. So we can use it towards law enforcement, but we can't use it for fire protection, for example. Just randomly, arbitrary, non-predictable from session to session rules on how we can spend this major component of our economy. So we're general fund poor because the property tax almost exclusively goes back to the schools. The income tax, the state income tax, goes back to the schools. The SITLA revenue, the state and institute trust lands, goes back to the schools. The tourism tax can only be used for marketing or mitigating tourism impacts. You see what I'm saying? Where's the money for our general fund? It has to come from
sales tax, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what you get. Could you
So,
use more?
and that's it. In Kanab, for example, we're tied with Summit County, Park City, for the highest tax rate in the state because we're desperate. That's what we've got to feed our general fund. And as you know, sales tax is fairly volatile. It's not a stable tax. So we really have to be careful, which is, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. We should be careful to stockpile money because we might have a full year that's a dry year. And so we basically have to hold on to so much money that we can't spend hardly any money. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. You know, especially in a responsible manner to
Mhm.
plan for the future. You mentioned schools. What is your situation as far as critical race theory and LGBT people, men identifying as women playing in women's sports? Have you had any of that come into you yet?
Well, statewide, I think several years ago, there were five transgender youth in the state, and now there's over 500. So just on a statewide level, it's increased 100 times the incidence of youth presenting as transgender. I don't want to get too heavy into all of those policies that have to do with school because that's the county school board, which is a separately elected public official. But I will say that I think that overall our school board has balanced very well the idea of local control, the idea of not being hateful, but deferring back to parental sovereignty, which is a vital issue. So I don't know if you know, but our school board was the very first school board to allow for parental exemption for mask wearing in schools. And then after that, two other counties followed suit with similar. Instead of saying, "Oh, it takes a doctor to exempt your child," or the parent could exempt their own child, which is what our Constitution calls for. Our Utah State Constitution calls for. It calls for the parent being the ultimate guide on the children's education and all aspects of it.
That's good.
Yeah.
And what happened during the COVID pandemic? Your tourism probably dropped down to nothing. And what about closing and
So
vaccinations and things like that?
in the initial 2 weeks to slow the spread, that was the case. And there were some state directives that damaged us and changed our economy greatly. So Kane County, unlike Washington County and some other counties, has not really stamped out vacation rentals, Airbnbs or VRBOs. And because of that, our economy is relatively resilient to pressure. So, for example, when the state government said all the dining rooms have to close in all the restaurants around town, all over the state, right? Do you remember this?
Yeah.
Well, people didn't want to stay in a hotel because when you live or when you're staying at a hotel, you go out to eat, but you couldn't go out to eat. So people were coming here by the thousands and thousands to either camp, stay in an RV, or stay in an Airbnb so that they could go to the grocery store, get some food for themselves, and then cook it back where they were staying. And because we hadn't stamped out that portion of the tourism industry, our economy did great, fantastic, record breaking, and it saved us. So I'm glad.
Yeah. I often hear about fires over there. That probably has an effect on your tourism as well.
Yes, it can. And so it's interesting. So we have the Dixie National Forest here, and then we have the National Parks, the National Park Service. We have BLM land, we have national monuments, and the list goes on. And all of these are managed by the federal government. Well, what we would like to do is have mining again, as we did before, logging again, as we did before. We would like the ability to thin and manage our forests. We would like the ability to remove dead wood. We would like the ability to do prescribed burns, not just, oops, a fire started, now let's decide what to do about it or not. But in order to have a little bit more stewardship of the lands that surround us, there's no buffer. I mean, we're right up against these federal lands. And so because the forest hasn't been managed in the ancient ways, the First Nations peoples would manage with prescribed burns on an annual basis often. And now we can't do that. We have to do whatever the federal government says, and they don't say that. So we have these swaths, huge swaths of land that are tinder boxes, just waiting to have one little lightning strike, one little campfire, one little spark from a rock hitting the underside of undercarriage of a vehicle or whatever. And we've got tens of thousands of acres ablaze. So yeah, I'd like to see that changed. I'd like to see a return.
What happens when there is a fire?
So oftentimes when there is a fire, because these are federal lands, the federal government decides what to do about the fire. So they'll often say, delay the decision until it's to the level where it has to be managed federally. And then it takes days for them to get the federal people there and set up and the firefighter team. So we don't have agency over the land that surrounds us and about how we respond to the danger that is presented to us and our livelihoods and our homes.
Okay, you have any good news?
Yeah, I mean, the good news is that, like I said, political refugees are moving here. They want to know how they can help. They want to know how they can prevent the kind of overreach that they've seen, that they've fled, and they're highly engaged. This is one of the most Republican and also most politically savvy areas in the state, if not the nation. People turn out for votes. They understand the issues deeply. People are committed here to making as much as we can life better for ourselves. I think very many people understand here that when you get something, you give something up. So we here have a lot more freedom than other areas enjoy. And sometimes that means a few less services. Or maybe we have lower taxes, but that means, again, we don't call someone when a tumbleweed lands on our front porch. We just take care of it ourselves and help our neighbor out.
Well, good for you.
I want to talk for just a moment about affordable housing. I know I said there's no such thing as affordable housing, and that is somewhat true because not everyone can, there's no level of affordability that's going to reach everyone.
Well, how is your housing situation? Do you have a lot of rentals? Prices are going up. You have land available?
So we don't have land available. There's a lot of things we don't have control over, but one thing we do have control over as a government is at least getting out of the way and not willfully increasing the cost of housing with extra requirements. So when you say that, only large lots is a viable way to build, or you can't have a mobile home, or some other thing that makes sense economically for certain individuals within the market. When you start regulating, citifying, gentrifying with regulations and ordinances, that's when the prices start going up even more. So maybe we can't solve the problem. Maybe we're not going to have rows and rows of government housing, but at least we don't have to add to the problem. We can take a step back and say, okay, we're going to let you as an individual property owner work out the fine minutia on your land that you've invested it in, that you want to live in for the rest of your life or for however long, and allow for different sizes of housing, different types of housing, different sizes of lots, different densities. It's all residential. It's all someone's home.
Yeah, are there lots of regulations as far as being able to build? Can I come over there and pitch a tent?
There is a zone that allows glamping, yes.
Glamping.
County.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's cool.
And currently, there are certain types of tiny homes that are also allowed. If you build it there, the regulations for some reason don't currently allow you to have a tiny home placed on the property, but you can have a tiny home built on your property.
Well, okay.
That's
Yeah.
right. There, we're allowed to try. Equal opportunity doesn't necessarily mean equal outcomes. And there's something inherently unfair about equal outcome. Somebody gets suppressed. Somebody gets unfairly boosted.
It's communism.
Yes, it's communism.
It's not equal for the people that you take the stuff away from.
Mm-hmm. And in
Or
a
who
certain,
produce for everybody else that doesn't want to work.
absolutely. And to a certain extent, I do feel that we are living in a situation that resembles communistic rule here, in that many communist societies, each individual is informed of what their profession will be. This person, you're going to be a gardener. This person, you're going to be a doctor. You look like you'd be a good dancer. You're going to dance for the Soviet ballet or whatever. And there's not that idea of individual sovereignty over their own life and livelihood and situation and circumstance. And here in Kane County, with basically our only industry left to us being tourism, not absolutely, but close to it, it's as though the federal government and the state government's complicit in this is telling us that your industry is tourism, and that's what you've got, whether you like it or not. Make it work.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah,
Yeah,
I know.
we're not giving up.
Oh, good. Yeah, because that socialism and communism is growing all over the state. We're nowhere near as conservative as we think we are. Everything else, is supposed to be given to you. It doesn't work that way very good.
Yeah, one example that you just reminded me of an example. We'd love to have, so one industry that isn't tourism is we'd like to have tournaments, meets, track meets, baseball tournaments, things like that. And we need more lights on our baseball fields in order to really effectively hold tournaments here. But we can get state grant money as much as we want practically for trails and other nature pursuits. But outdoor recreation is also baseball, sports. And we'd love to have access to some grant money for lights on the field, but no, that's not something that fits into the current agenda. So it's not even a possibility.
Well, if you sold it to the state as a additional tourism revenue, wouldn't that work? That's tourism.
Yes, maybe. And so we've got to work within their parameters. We don't set our own parameters for what works for us. We'll have to work within their parameters. And it's frustrating. We can be as strategic as we can. We can punch above our weight class. We can work together with our neighbors. We can hold the state government accountable when they say that they keep rural concerns close to heart. And wins happen. Like SUWA was recently, SUWA was recently put in their place and blocked from holding up land use issues and road issues. They used to just be able to do endless lawsuits and claims, and they weren't going anywhere. They were just using them as a tactic to lock up our land use. And just this past week, SUWA got a big setback to them that they couldn't just keep doing these lawsuits that didn't have any chance of resolution. And that was a huge deal for us here. It gives us fresh hope that we're going to at least be able to provide road access to these national monument areas and be able to keep using our established existing roads.
Are you represented well in Salt Lake, our representative and senator?
Well, I think so. We've played a little bit of musical chairs with our senators. So it was Okerlund, and then he retired. And then we got Darren Owens for a while, and then he just got redistricted. You know how every 10 years after the census,
Yeah.
redistricting can occur. So Hinkins is now our senator. And then our representative is the fabulously principled Phil Lyman.
Good.
So
He's doing some good stuff.
hmm and things might change for him too, because now he's had to pick up Grand County.
In addition to Kane.
Yeah, he's got Kane, San Juan. I can't remember all the counties he's had, but he didn't have Grand before, and now he does, is my understanding. Grand County is site of Moab, and it's had quite the leftist incursion, so he'll have a tougher battle than he used to. It was mainly only rural conservative counties in his jurisdiction.
Well, find some common ground.
That's how we get into trouble, is we try to compromise and find common ground, and then as soon as we meet in the middle moves to the left. I almost feel like it's better just to be very strong right from the beginning. Like with the pandemic response, I think the areas that fared the best nationally and even internationally were those that right from the start said, no, we ain't playing. I've heard that saying, or maybe it was a meme that says, you comply because you want the restrictions to end, but as long as you comply, the restrictions will never end. And so I feel like instead of always the right moving closer to the middle, maybe we don't. Maybe we just say no, like the Canadian truckers finally did. And that movement was eventually crushed. But in the meantime, I think it was instrumental in some of the changes that happened. And I wish we had done it sooner.
One thing you got to admire about liberals and progressives, they look at things in long term. How long did it take Ralph Nader to get seatbelts in cars?
Mm-hmm.
25 years.
And you make an incredible point right there, because how many times when I said this is against our medical sovereignty to be forced to wear face coverings or forced to get a vaccine, and then people said, well, you wear seatbelts, what's the big deal? It's for safety. I love Mark Grau's safety third statement, and it's just to get people to ask, what do you mean, isn't safety first? Nope. Pick any number, but it's not first. It shouldn't be first, especially when someone else tells you how to be safe. Each individual wants to be safe. And so that individual is already motivated to keep themselves and their loved ones safe. Why should it be brought in from the outside, try to keep us safe? That's not actually to keep us safe. It's to keep us controlled. But just to be clear, I don't have any problem with liberals. Liberal is something to me that's very different from leftist. I do have a problem with leftist agenda, which is depopulation, destruction of the nuclear family, putting down men and fathers, trying to make men and fathers obsolete, etc. But liberal, the idea of you live your way, I'll live my way, it's all good, I'm okay with that.
Another question I wanted to ask, how is your election system going there? Are you still doing mail-in, and is there any interest in changing?
So as we talked about earlier today, there's only 8,000 approximately residents in Kane County, and it's one of the largest counties in the state. So for example, Bullfrog is 5 hours away from Kanab, which is the county seat and where the county clerk auditor is based. And so we were the first county in the state to go to mail-in voting, and we kind of have had decades to work out any kinks and provide checks and balances. So I know many people firsthand who have voted and then gotten a call from the clerk's office. Your signature doesn't look quite like the signature that we have on file for you. Did you submit this ballot, or has your ballot been commandeered? And then if there's any kind of question that can be easily caught. With only 8,000 people and not everyone voting, it's easier in one of these smaller systems to make sure that everything's on the up and up. The county clerk auditor's office is extremely diligent, and it's not that you can only do mail-in balloting, which was one of the major issues in the 2019 national election, was people weren't allowed to vote in person. And so, for example, they also only mailed ballots to active voters. And after a certain number of years of not being active, you don't get a ballot anymore, just automatically. They're not sending ballots 10 years after a person is deceased or has moved away. They're not sending multiple ballots to the same individual. So there's much less chance for ballot harvesting or anything like that.
Well, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you've got our support and our endorsement, and best of luck to you, Celeste. Have fun growing.
I'm looking forward to some new neighbors. Good. Thank you so much, Ed.
You're welcome.